In an interview, Shakur Stevenson said that he would whoop Manny Pacquiao, he'd smoke him, and he questions whether or not, Pacquiao is on steroids. Most of these guys do. Bud's done it, Floyd Mayweather's done it, and of course Shakur Stevenson has obviously done it. That's the point of this video. But he said that in an even fight, we make sure there's testing and whatnot. I think it's just like, he didn't have to say all that. It's just like a relative comparison. The fight is unlikely to happen, if I'm being real, but who knows? Pacquiao versus Barrios is happening, so I'm not saying never to anything anymore. So I feel like if Shakur and Pacquiao were to fight now, it would definitely be a relatively boring fight. I think it'd just be the same thing of, Shakur not wanting to get hit, not really wanting to engage, but he might be able to because Pacquiao's older. But, in their primes, I think Pacquiao wins, and I think Shakur, as good as he is, I don't think he's good enough to beat Manny. I think Manny's just at a different level. When Shakur's career is all said and done, I think I'll have a better, and more sure answer on what would happen. But, if I had to think about it now, I just think Shakur doesn't take enough risks to beat Pacquiao. I think his style is definitely difficult for Manny. We saw what Floyd was able to do against Manny, or not allow Manny to get close to him to land his 6 to 7 punch combinations. But I think Floyd was more quick, with his feet in terms of his footwork was really solid. Manny had really good footwork, but I think Floyd was one of the fastest fighters. I think he had really underrated feet. He was really able to use his feet to get out of certain situations. When he was against the rope, he was really able to maneuver out of the ropes and away from Manny Pacquiao. Shakur has a little bit more of a stable and stationary style, in my opinion, but he does have that jab, and I think he'd be slightly bigger than Pacquiao, obviously, and he'd have that advantage. Might have a little bit of IQ, maybe be a better counter puncher, but I just don't think he has enough on those shots to get the respect of Pacquiao, and I think Pacquiao would beat Shakur. But Shakur is, one of the best boxers, if not the best boxer. And I'm not saying fighter, I'm saying boxer, because at the end of the day, I don't really think Shakur fights that much. He doesn't really turn into that brawler at the end of the day. And I know that, boxing is a sweet science as well, but, it was built off what Manny Pacquiao said. He was talking about how boxing's about finding balance. You have to obviously be smart, but you have to entertain the fans, because boxing is a sport about giving the fans what they want to see. That's what boxing became known for. It's not hit and not get hit, even though it's fun to watch still. For me, I enjoy Shakur and Devin. I like watching them fight. Maybe not, when Shakur fought De Los Santos, boring fight. When Jose Ramirez fought Devin, was also boring. But in general, I like watching Devin and Shakur. They have poor performances, of course, but you guys also have to remember, this sport is exciting to watch because of the history of not hit and don't get hit, but we want to see knockouts too. Don't get it twisted. Casuals only like knockouts, but the boxing purists, they like knockouts too. It's still fun to watch. There are beautiful knockouts, beautiful boxing performances, and dominant performances. But we do like to see some violence. Don't get it twisted. We like to see knockouts as well. But I'm also saying that I can appreciate what Shakur and Devin do. But a lot of people hate watching Devin and Shakur just because it's not appealing to the eye for them. But I personally like watching Devin and Shakur. Not when they're necessarily running and people think Shakur runs all the time. But if you really watch him, you know what you're seeing. And I think, he's had some performances where, yeah, he could for sure be a little bit more busy, but, he's still got a lot more left in the tank. A lot of big fights for him on the table. Same with Devin. I think these guys, Shakur and Devin get a lot of hate, but it's all about, proving the people wrong. And at the end of the day, if your legacy is solidified, then that's all that matters. You're not going to please everybody, but I also do agree with Pacquiao, guys like Shakur, guys like Devin, they need to find a balance between entertainment and getting the job done. I understand, these guys are winning fights and they're outclassing their opponents, but, like Pacquiao said, you have to entertain the fans. Boxing became popular because of entertainment. It wasn't really, the sport itself. People wanted to see other guys beating each other up, and that's also the beauty of boxing as well, in addition to the sweet science. So Shakur and Devin, they just have to find balance, and I think they'll get a better, reception from the boxing fans, the boxing world. I just think that people don't appreciate them because they haven't seen them in a real dogfight. Devin's been beaten up before, but in in a real slugfest. You know, you won't catch these guys in exchanges because they avoid that at all costs. That's just their styles. It's worked for them so far, but I think if they really wanted to, you know, become bigger superstars, they'd have to take a little bit more risks, because I think they're good enough to do it. It's just a question of whether or not they're willing to. And I think that's what separates good fighters from legends, is that willing to be great, daring to be great, and taking risks at the end of the day. You got to risk it for the biscuit, baby. That's the sport of boxing. That's how you become a legend, not just trying to pad that record, that undefeated record. Real ones don't give a shit about that. Real ones care about, you know, he's taking that fight and he wants to go for blood. You know, that's why we love Inouye. That's why we love Terrence Crawford, Tank Davis, because these guys are out for violence. You know, it's a sweet science, of course, but there's a reason why the most watched fighters are the most watched fighters, because they put it all out there. They put it all on the line and they don't give a shit. That's why the Shakurs and Devins of the world, they get a little bit of hate. But, you know, at the end of the day, they're still great boxers. We're just saying, you know, they're not the most exciting to watch in the world. I can appreciate it, but they're definitely not the most exciting fighters out there. So, is what it is. Let me know in the comments who you guys think would have won between Shakur and Pacquiao. I'm going with Pacquiao all day. But thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys on the next Nabs Boxing video. Peace.